Anybody else? Yeah, yeah. Oh man, thank you for your sharing today. I like being fortified by other folks sharing about the good things that God's doing in their lives, and so I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and just hear some of that good stuff. How many of you guys remember the concept of the American dream? How many of you remember when the American dream was a definite reality for you if you wanted it? Actually, most of you guys are living the American dream, aren't you? I mean, you are, seriously. And I heard a politician say the other day, in fact, we've heard several politicians talk about the fact that the American dream is in danger. And I don't really know if I'm buying into that or not, because we still are doing pretty well in this country compared to everybody else in the world. And But you guys remember the old concept of it, to have the White House with the picket fence, right? And to have the 2 cars and the 2.2 children, and to have a steady job with benefits, and you could always get 4 to 6 weeks of paid vacation, and be part of a civic club and have membership in that. And Dad could have hobbies. He had time to play golf and go fishing, and Mom could be in the bridge club and attend the PTA, and the kids could go play t-ball and soccer and football and baseball. Kind of an idyllic kind of life. And I remember when I lived in Columbus, when I first got out of seminary, the joke up there was always that you knew you'd achieved the American dream when you had season tickets to Ohio State football. And I mean, it was like, that was it. That was the apex of living. And I went back to the 80s, and I thought back to when I was first out of graduate school, and Mom was wearing Liz Claiborne and Ann Klein and Donna Karen, and Dad was, he had arrived if he was wearing Hart Schaffner and Marks and Palm Beach, and some of the kids and younger people, they won't remember Reebok pumps, but they were big. You guys remember when we used to blow up our tennis shoes? Y'all remember? Oh my gosh, it was amazing. And did anybody here own a pair of the pumps? I did. Oh man, they were amazing. Oh, they were cool. And the 80s was the me generation, the materialism generation. Nobody lost any money in the stock market, because you could go out and buy junk bonds, and you could go out and buy stocks, and you could become a yuppie. And that was, of course, replaced by the simplicity and the family values of the early 90s. But it was a cool concept, the American dream. And if you worked hard, you could get it. And actually, if you still work hard, you can still achieve it. Although there are, like I said, politicians who think, it's in trouble. I don't know. I think it's still attainable. I want to talk to you today about a guy that, for all intentional purposes, had achieved the American dream. And a father that had really succeeded in life, and I need to fill in the spaces to kind of explain to you why I say that. But his story comes from John chapter 4, verses 46 through 53, and I want us to look at the story. I'll read it to you out of the New Living Translation. Here's the story. In the course of his journey through Galilee, he arrived at a town in Cana where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a government official in the city of Capernaum whose son was very sick. And when he heard that Jesus had come from Judea and was traveling in Galilee, he went over to Cana. And he found Jesus and begged him to come to Capernaum with him to heal his son who was about to die. Let's read on. Jesus asked, "Must I do miraculous signs and wonders before you people will believe in me?" The official pleaded, "Lord, please come now before my little boy dies." And then Jesus told him, "Go back home, your son will live." And the man believed Jesus' word and started home. And while he was on his way, some of his servants met him with the news that his son was alive and well. He asked them when the boy had begun to feel better, and they replied, "Yesterday afternoon at 1 o'clock, his fever suddenly disappeared." And then the father realized it was the same time that Jesus had told him, "Your son will live." And the officer and his entire household believed in Jesus. That's a pretty good story, isn't it? It's a miraculous story. And the reason I say it involves the American dream, if you will, is that here's a guy, literally, the scripture calls him a royal official, it calls him a leader, it calls him a king's man. But here's a guy with some standing in society. Here's a guy that had achieved something. Here's a guy that was successful, that had the opportunity to look down on a lot of people if he chose to, and he didn't have to look up to very many people. Here's a guy that was, for lack of a better way of putting it, he'd arrived. He was successful. He had a reputation. He was a king's man. He was somebody in the royal court. And not only that, but the Bible makes a point of reminding you that he lived in Capernaum. Now, Capernaum is like living in a resort area compared to the area of Cana in Galilee. He was essentially living in a seaside port. How many of you like going to the ocean? Yeah. How many of you wish we were leaving right after church? Yeah. Maybe not. This guy lived in a seaside resort, and I can visualize, and so I want you to just kind of think about it. Here's a guy that was successful. Here's a guy that lives in a seaside resort, and he's arrived. He's comfortable. He's made it. In many ways, he's living the American dream, isn't he? He's got it all. And I've often said, this is a man of, y'all know the 4 P's, right? Power, pull, prestige, right? Privilege, power, pull, prestige, privilege. He had them all. He had it all. And he had everything he needed. But in spite of that, things weren't so good in his house, because in the middle of all this stuff, reality struck, didn't it? Because he had a little boy that is lying in bed with a soaring fever, and it's draining the life out of him, and he's literally melting into the sheets, and he's this close to dying. Now, I think this guy was probably wealthy by the standards of his day, and I think he probably lived in a comfortable home, and I think he had servants, and I think he had plenty to eat, and I think he had plenty of clothes. But here's the deal. He had everything he needed but something to save his son, right? And the reality of it is I think he probably turned to his wealth, and I think he hired the best doctors he could hire, and all they gave him was a pharmacy bill and a bunch of empty prescription bottles, right? And I think they practiced medicine to the best of their ability, but they couldn't save this little boy. And he probably tried folk remedies. Eat this, swallow this, do this, go here, try this, and nothing happens. And all this guy could do was literally just mop the brow of his little boy and just change his soaking wet sheets and bring him fresh towels and just somehow wait and hope that this little fella could break the grip that was on him. Because he had a death grip on him. His son was ready to die, wasn't he? Now, anybody ever been in that place where your money didn't matter? Hey, y'all, listen to me. Have you guys ever been in that place where your money didn't matter? You ever been to that place where you'd achieved and worked hard and you were successful, but it didn't matter because life was bigger than you? I've been there 2 or 3 times. Have you? You see, this fellow was right there, and none of what he had achieved mattered. because it wasn't enough. And this little boy was dying, and I appreciate Ken Geyer because, you know, when you get between a rock and a hard place and nothing's happening and you don't know where to turn for your next breath, it's amazing what you start thinking about. And I wonder if this guy started thinking about the fact that none of his money mattered, and that his job didn't matter, and his land didn't matter, and his reputation didn't matter, and his standing in the court didn't matter, because it wasn't saving his boy. I wonder if he thought about all the privileges he had and said to himself, it doesn't mean a thing if it doesn't save my boy. Right? You know, you can have a whole lot of things, but and be able to buy a whole lot of things, but you can't buy health, can you? You can buy better health, but you can't buy health. And you know, the idea that, how do I say this? Y'all ever live in a house where there's a boy in there? Anybody here that's got boys? They make a unique sound, don't they? If you've ever had a boy, they can make some unique sounds. In fact, little boys run around the house and make noises you don't even understand. There's a reason why girls talk quicker, right? Well, they're smarter, right? Yeah, I hate to say it, but it's true. They pick up on things quicker. Their language skills advance far beyond little boys. Boys make funny noises. They do. And they run around just hilariously with all kinds of energy. But can you imagine a house for this guy where that little boy's not in it? Can you imagine that? Could you imagine to think to yourself that, you know, just him not being there? Nobody to fish with, nobody to play catch with, one less plate, you know, there at the supper table. And I can imagine this guy sitting there going, man, I worked too hard. I worked too long. I was gone too much. I missed too much. I got to do something to save my boy. That's the way fathers think. That's how fathers roll. That's what comes into our minds when we think about situations. And so in the midst of all of this stuff, the Bible says, boy, it tells just the most amazing story, because all of a sudden, somebody comes up to this guy and says, hey, you know, Jesus is over in Cana, and it's not but 20 miles. Do you know Jesus is in Cana? And remember, the Bible makes a point of mentioning that he's in Cana of Galilee, where he's already done a big miracle, right? Y'all, he took grape juice. Water to wine, right? It went way beyond grape juice. I mean, he's got a reputation. When he showed up at a wedding in that town, they really had a wedding because of this amazing miracle. And somebody told him. Now, I would like to know who that was because they were really smart. I don't know if it was a servant. I don't know if it was word of mouth, somebody. But somehow he got wind of the fact that Jesus wasn't far away. Now, here's the real kicker. To this point, he doesn't believe in Jesus, does he? Guys, he's completely secular. He doesn't believe in Jesus. But he knows what he's heard about him. And so, when you get so desperate, you'll try anything. And so he says, you know, I'm going to go to Cana. And without hesitation, he makes a 20-mile trip and just searches frantically, and he finds this person. And then he does something that's so incredibly unusual for him. He goes and looks at Jesus standing before him, and you guys can get the irony of the whole situation. The royal official talking to a penniless carpenter, right? The man with everything begging somebody who has none of the world's goods. In fact, the Bible is really clear about the fact that he puts himself under Jesus' authority, because he looks at him and he says, sir. And that's what the Greek literally means, to put yourself under authority. He looks at this guy who's penniless and broke and an itinerant preacher and looks at him and he says, sir, you've got to do something or my boy's dying. Sir. By the way, isn't it amazing how much we can humble ourselves when our back's against the wall? And here's a perfect example of it. And so he just says, "Sir, you got to do something for my boy." And then Jesus looks at him, and he's almost callous, almost like it's a rebuke or almost like he's just indifferent. And he basically looks at the guy, and he says, "Man, everybody wants to see a sign before they'll believe. Everybody wants me to be a miracle worker. They want to see wonders before they'll believe. This is an odd generation I'm living in, so to speak." Now, at this point, if you didn't know the rest of the story, you'd think that Jesus was the most insensitive, callous person you met. Instead of, here's what we would do. "Oh, your son's sick? I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" Jesus looks and he says, "Why does everybody want to see a miracle?" But the reason he did it wasn't a rebuke. He's just saying, "Look, there's a circus atmosphere developing around me. I've become a national sensation, and I don't want to be considered a sideshow act. I don't want to be considered a carnival. I want people to understand that I am something completely different." It's just a statement of the time Jesus was living in. The guy looks at him, he says, "Sir, you gotta come. You gotta do something before my boy dies." And I think probably at this point he was on his hands and knees and pleading. And by the way, I caught myself in this story this week. I can't tell you the last time I got on my hands and knees and pled for anything. Hey guys, hey men, when was the last time you got on your hands and knees and begged for anything? It's not in my vocabulary. I don't beg. Right, y'all? Come on, men. Come on, men. It's not in our DNA. We don't roll that way. That's not how we live. We're tough. We're men. When was the last time you got down on your hands and knees and begged God for something? And pleaded with God and asked God to do something? You know why most of us got down there? Because we realized that we couldn't fix it. We realized we didn't have the strength to do anything about it. And I love the humility of this guy, because this guy had everything but the very thing that he needed. And so he was willing to get down. And one of the beautiful things about the story is Jesus sees all of the pain, he sees all the struggle, and so he looks at him and he says, "Look, you can go. Your boy's going to live." And then the story gets even more crazy, because the guy who doesn't believe in him takes him at his word. Y'all, come on. A guy who doesn't believe in him takes him at his word, gets up and starts walking home. Show of hands of how many of you would just get up and walk away. Not a one of you. You would at least say, "Wait a second, aren't you going to do something or say something? Aren't you going to wave your hands over me?" Right? But Jesus simply says, "Hey, go on home. He'll be all right." And the guy does it. Now I got to ask you a question. Who's got more faith, you or the guy who doesn't believe in him? He's got a whole lot more faith than I've had. And the guy gets up in tremendous faith and starts walking home. And of course, in this age of meism, give it to me now, instantaneous service, I'll be honest with you, I have problems believing. Seeing is believing. I want to see something before I walk away, but not this guy. And you guys know how good the story is, because he's on his way home and the party meets him and they say, "Hey, you're not going to believe this. Instantaneously, your boy just jumped out of bed." Right? He said, "What time?" 1 o'clock. And then he starts going, "That's when I was talking to Jesus." Right? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Even before he arrived home, they were waiting on him. How many of you like homecomings? How many of you like it when you get home? Man, I'm telling y'all, sometimes there's nothing better than walking through the door in the evening, right, and getting around people that you love, right? How many of you think Daddy ran home? Oh, my gosh, I believe it's the quickest 20 miles Daddy ever had. How many of you think when he went into the house, he scooped that boy up? Yeah. Oh, glory, y'all, what a miracle. An amazing thing, in the middle of, quote, the American dream, he really realized what was important in life. I mean, he really did. There's nothing quite like living this life that you and I that we get to live, this incredibly comfortable, good life that we get to live. But I'm going to tell you what, guys, it's nothing without Jesus. It's nothing. See, one of the truths of the story is that you can have it all, but if the bottom falls out, who do you fall back onto? You see, if Jesus is not there, you don't have anywhere to fall back onto. And isn't it amazing how that Jesus can just rescue us? And just if we just put ourselves into his hands. You know, look, there's going to be some times in your life, in this really good life that we get to live, look, tribulations just got to happen. It's got to happen. Hard times have got to come. But when it does, we got to have something to fall back onto, and that falling back onto Jesus is what I want to do. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to have him in your life so that when the bottom falls out, you fall into his hands. Because that's real living. One of the things I noticed lately in my life is I get so comfortable that I forget how much I need him. Y'all, come on. I just get so comfortable some days. We were talking this week. I was talking to a couple of folks this week, and I was talking about how much fun I'm just having. I was just talking about how much fun I've been having, how good my life is, how much I enjoy living where I live and having the friends I have and rubbing shoulders with the people I get to rub shoulders with and all the people I know because of the church and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes you get so comfortable with that, you just forget how much you need Jesus, right? Well, these hard times that come to us sometimes, they're not punishment from God. They're ways for God to remind us that he still needs to be the foundation of all of it. And you know, look, I didn't achieve the dream, so to speak. It was given to me by God. And I just need to trust him with it. I want to give you guys a word of encouragement. This week, when you walk around and you live this week, you're going to meet a royal official. You're going to meet somebody. And let me tell you something. They may have everything, but the bottom has fallen out. And you need to be an instrument of healing. You need to be ready to minister to them. You need to be Jesus' presence to them, if you will. Because you're going to meet a lot of royal officials this week. You really are. See, that royal official needed two things. He needed a clear voice from God, and he got it. And he needed a genuine touch from God, and he got it. And God can do that for the people that you come in contact with this week. Now, let me finish by saying this. There are two miracles in this story, and I love both of them. And you guys know what the first one is. The little boy got healed, didn't he? What a miracle. But that wasn't the biggest miracle in the story, was it? Because the Bible says that when it was all said and done, the royal official and his household believed. And that's a bigger miracle. In fact, that's the greatest miracle that will ever happen to you. The most important thing that will ever happen in the midst of your dream is to know Jesus. It's to have him there when the bottom falls out. Because in the end, that's really what this story is all about. Yeah. How many of you like the life you're leading? How many of you are enjoying this life you're leading? Seriously, I'm asking, how many of you are enjoying it? It's wonderful, isn't it? It's nothing without Jesus. What are you going to do this week when the bottom falls out? You're going to hold to Jesus, aren't you? That's the story. That's the story. If you want to live a safe and secure life, I'll tell anybody here, listen, it's to have Jesus in your heart, and then He can bless all this stuff that you have. He can bless it. But you got to have Him in your heart. Well, I'm thankful. I'm thankful for all of you. I'm thankful we can be in a place where we can enjoy this life. And I'm thankful that it's because of Jesus that I have it all. Amen.